Good afternoon or morning or whenever you're watching this. Not legal advice. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, show to your pets, plants, neighbors, countrymen. I wanted to talk a little bit about bad journalism involving Tesla and specifically with regard to the settlement of a personal injury lawsuit involving autopilot that was settled, I think, yesterday or the day before in California. It was set for trial coming up, I think, on Monday, a jury trial. And I heard some questions about why would they settle it, and I saw how the journalist quote unquote handled it, and kind of wanted to address that and put it in perspective and answer the questions. Of course, before they do that, as I always do, I I go through a couple of attempted bouts of humor, and we're talking about journalists today. So, what did the journalist say when he saw an obese sea cow explode? Oh, the huge manatee. It's tough to find journalists qualified to report on rhythm sections. They need to cover all the bases and not skip a beat. And last but not least, a journalist, quote unquote, is sentenced to die in the gallows, but they run out of rope. I guess that means no noose is good news. So, talking about the particular case. So, it was a case where a former, because he's deceased, unfortunately, Apple engineer crashed in the Silicon Valley, crashed his car into the center median, I think going at 71 miles an hour. And unfortunately, he passed on that crash. An autopilot was apparently um, employed. Unfortunately, at the time of the incident, the deceased driver did not have his hands on the wheels. So I guess they looked at the data, and for at least 6 seconds prior to the crash, which is probably not a good idea, the driver did not have his hands on the wheel, and it turned out he was playing a video game. Apparently, that's what you could tell. So the case was set for trial. Uh, it was a jury trial expected to last several months or several weeks. So why would you settle a case like that? So let's say Tesla thought the driver was at least comparatively negligent. So when you have a case, and let's say the driver sued Tesla, claiming they were negligent, when you would have a trial, the court or the jury would look at and compare the relative fault. And let's say, and I'll make up numbers, let's say that the jury found that the plaintiff was entitled to $1 million, but was 50% responsible for the accident. So the sum would be reduced by 50%, and that's what the victim would get, $500,000 in that example, minus legal fees, of course. So that's kind of generally how it works. So in this case, we didn't get to this point, but what would have happened is trial would have happened. Experts would have been put on by both sides, and it's probably a reason, in essence, why you don't want to have a trial. And plaintiff would have said, I think that's what they were claiming, that the autopilot was oversold. That's kind of their argument. And Tesla would say that the driver was negligent, and the accident wouldn't have happened otherwise. If they are supposed to keep their hands on the wheel, they're supposed to pay attention. They're not supposed to play video games. So why would you settle that? Tesla would settle it if it's working on FSD right now and doesn't want a lawsuit and trial where a plaintiff would put on an expert, and the expert would say, no matter what, that it was Tesla's fault. That information, true or not, could then be used by regulators if Tesla was seeking approval for FSD. So why would you want to take that risk? Additionally, there's probably insurance in play here. So Tesla probably has insurance. It was before the trial. Insurance, and I'm speculating to some degree, but I'm not. It's probably beyond speculation. I would feel comfortable that they had insurance. So insurance would have covered the settlement. So if there was a settlement, and it appears there was a settlement, although it's confidential, so we may not know the terms, which is intentional also. that would have played out in that process. Now, so we don't want the regulators to see the expert information, true or not, because it could be utilized against Tesla. There's insurance that probably covers the amount of the settlement. The most expensive part of litigation is actually the trial. We hadn't gotten to the trial that would last several weeks. If insurance is paying for the defense as well as any settlement, they would have spent literally hundreds of thousands of additional, maybe millions, in legal fees. So depending on what the settlement was, and I don't think it's going to be a huge number, again, because of the issues of comparative negligence, but because of that, there's reason to settle it. Now, how would you have calculated damages if you would have gone forward? So if someone dies, how do you figure out what they're worth? What you do is you calculate and you estimate, and that would have been put on by an expert, what they would have earned over the remaining years of their life. And I think that the engineer was an Apple engineer, which my son is, and he was 38 years old, which is my son's age, as it turns out. So figuring out maybe he would have, I'm figuring he's going to work till 65. So let's say 20, and it may not happen that way, but you would put on an expert. Expert would say he's going to live 27 more years. He would estimate what he would make. So that just for the purposes of this discussion, let's assume that he's making $500,000 a year times 27 years. That would be $13.5 million plus interest. Prejudgment interest is 7%. So you'd tack that on, but then you'd figure out comparative negligence. So if it's a 50-50, and I think it would be close to 50-50, if there's liability on the part of Tesla, and I don't know. But let's say for discussion, it's 50-50, you'd reduce that award by half. And that's how you would calculate damages. Now, in this article, the writer doesn't talk about insurance, doesn't talking about why you'd want to settle, doesn't talk about how you calculate damages. And in fact, at one point in time says in some personal injury cases, I don't even know if they use the term personal injury cases. In some cases, large companies have faced judgments or verdicts neighboring. Oh, here it is, exactly. It says wrongful death suits involving big companies have at times resulted in awards north of $1 billion for a single death for someone who would earn $13.5 million in their lifetime. Nah, that's just not true. So this writer, actually it's a team of writers who did this, left out the most important part: insurance, comparative negligence, the reasons why you'd want to settle, the fact that 95% of cases plus settle prior to trial, and the fact of that there would be comparative negligence reducing that, and the fact that the $1 billion judgment is ridiculous. It's just nonsense. So that was and by the way, this is out of CNN Business. So David Goldman, who's the writer, I think he did a terrible job here. You reported on a settlement, but you didn't give any of the material terms or the motivations for the party. You didn't talk about the risks for both sides, and you gave out ridiculous conclusions in terms of what a judgment would be. So this is I just pulled this out. Happened to strike me that if you weren't sophisticated in the law, you would look at this and you would have different feelings about why Tesla would settle. In fact, I think Ross Gerber threw out a question: why would they settle? It's pretty obvious. I'm surprised that somebody like Ross Gerber would ask the question, because anybody with any level of sophistication in the business world would understand the reasons and practicalities of why somebody might settle a case, especially when there's insurance involved, especially when you have bigger interest at heart. And again, unfortunately, that was not presented in the article. So I just wanted to address this briefly. That's why I threw it out. It's not really relevant to Tesla's future, but it's relevant to the treatment of Tesla in the media, and it could be all kinds of media. And it doesn't mean that CNN Business can't send out appropriate articles. It just means that this one I really thought was poorly drafted and it suggested things that were not accurate. And even sophisticated people like Ross Gerber really didn't understand it, or were confused and didn't understand it. Pretty obvious to me. I think this is just rudimentary, business as usual. Doesn't signify any liability. In fact, in the settlement agreement, there will be no admission of liability. There may not be an admission of facts, and it'll be confidential. So, for all those reasons, that's why this case was settled. I feel bad for the engineer who passed away. I feel bad for his family. I think he had a couple of kids. Hopefully, the money that the insurance company pays will be used well. But I think Tesla's getting a bad rap in this particular case, and I don't think the journalists did them any favor. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out briefly. Be well, take care, have a great day, and when you read reports about legal issues, read it with an ounce of skepticism. Anyway, take care.